What is up, guys? Clay Enjoyer here, and it is time to enjoy. And in this video, I'm making Barry from Jetpack Joyrider. I can start this sculpture by building up a body with aluminum foil in a great Captain Morgan pose to really emphasize the power of this pose. Before then building up the body layer by layer of clay and smoothing out and adding clay in places that it needs it, like the waist and the back. To make the shoulders look a little less round, I can build up some clay on the sides as well to make them look a little bit more accurate to the original design. Just making a normal Barry would be pretty cool, but I want to put a little bit of that Clay Enjoyer spin on it. So I'm going to give Barry a bunch of big muscles, starting with the chest. Then I can add Barry's abs, which are little potatoes of clay, which can be blended and smoothed into his body to make them look a little bit more realistic and less artificial. Or at least less artificial, because clay's not real if I remember correctly, but I could be wrong. With that step done, I can now impale Barry with a giant spike to add his arms, which is the most unsettling T-pose I've ever made, which is also the first. Then I can build up his arms and bend them into place. And if anyone was wondering, I have tape on the arms which help the clay to hold on to the metal wire so it doesn't slip off as much, which obviously you can't see on camera but was very helpful. Then I can give Barry his big ol' biceps, which looks like he took a few too many steroids, and then I can bulk up his forearms to match. Then I can smooth out the forearms to get them to the shape that I want, and then I can build up the biceps a little more to try and make them look more natural, but it's kind of iffy at best. Then I can add some more clay to act as the triceps, which also tried to make it a little more normal looking. Then I can also add the big old shoulders with a little bit of clay to add some extra bulk and make it look somewhat more real. With Barry's arms almost complete, I can give him some little elbows which I will inevitably squish later. Then I can give him his undershirt for his suit and blending it into his abs to make it look like the shirt is much too small for him. To make the outer jacket of the suit, I can add some bacon strips of clay on either side and blend them in to make it look like it's extra layers of clothing, followed by another bacon strip on the back. With the upper body done, I can now start working on the pants by cutting out a line to make the seams and as well as the pockets, which also get their own individual lines cut into them. While editing this video, I noticed that these pants kind of look like sweatpants, but don't worry because when I add a bunch of worms of clay to make the folds, it'll make sense and they will look better. Now I can place those aforementioned worms of clay all over the body where I would think some wrinkles would naturally develop and fall. Obviously followed by blending them in, because like other steps, they don't look real or natural if I don't blend them in. And then I can start by making his shirt sleeves, which I forgot earlier, but are simple, smaller bacon strips of clay, which can be bent and torn up to make it look more accurate to the original artwork of Barry Steak Fries. Now with that little confusion out of the way, I can pull and tear Barry's sleeves to make him more game accurate before then making his big old tie, which I can put onto his chest. Now I can start working on his head, but Barry's head is roughly the size of a small car if you're actually looking at the references, but I want this character to be slightly realistic, so I'm going to make the head big, but not that big, if it makes any sense. So then I can smooth out this block of clay to make it a little bit more better and smooth out the proportions. With that part done, I can poke in some wonky eye sockets and poke on some slightly wonky eyes before blending in a nice big worm of clay to make him from shocked to a little bit more angry. Now with his eyes appropriately angry, I can give him his little nose, followed by some little bitty nostrils to add to that realism. And because of my outstanding planning, I didn't have enough room to make his mouth, so I had to add some extra clay to give him a big beefy chin, so I can make his eventual big open happy smiling face with his stubble. Then I can scratch into the surface where his teeth will go, and then I can cut individual teeth out to add to that realistic style. With his big happy smile added, I can squish some little worms of clay to act as his big ol' caterpillar eyebrows, and then I can give them some texture to, well, make them look like eyebrows. With almost all of the details in place, it's kind of hard to make the face look more realistic if I don't add some wrinkles. To give Barry his stubble, I can stab his face with a metal shaper tool, which makes some pretty convincing looking stubble. And then I can move on to making the hair and the ears. Now with Barry looking adequately old, I can put some crescents on the side of his ears and carve some lines in them to act as his ears and the little ear shapes and intricacies. Now to finally finish off Barry's head, I can give him some clay on top of his head, which obviously acts as hair, and I can scratch and scribe it to give the hair some direction and movement. With Barry's head finally complete, I can go back and give Barry a big ol' neck stump blended into his body so his big head can fit in place, and then I can put his head in place. And of course, while I'm doing this, one of my cats comes to inspect my work to make sure that I'm doing a good job. And then for some reason I can focus the camera on her while she looks at Barry's decapitated head before now finally putting on his head. Now I can start by making his hands by scratching lines into the clay hands to differentiate the different fingers before adding a little trigger and a little circle on top for extra detail before popping it into Barry's hands and giving him some thumbs, which can then be attached to his hands, and the little thumbs are just little worms of clay. And then I can add some wonky knuckles to make sure that the hands also look slightly realistic as well to fit with the rest of the style. Now with Barry's hands done, I can snip the tips of the armature wire hands and put them in place before blending some more clay into the forearms to make sure that the hands blend a little bit more smoothly into the rest of the arm. Now with Barry done, I can now start to work on his massive double machine guns, which start out like Barry did with a bunch of aluminum foil wrapped together. Now I can wrap this aluminum hot dog in a light layer of clay to start building up the rest of the machine gun to give it a smooth top, which obviously is like part of the original design, which I'm doing my best to follow, but I want to add some clay to make it a little bit more interesting. One of those things that I'm changing is this ammo box thing. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm assuming it's that. But I'm going to make it bigger because I think this little box is just too small for these two massive machine guns to end up firing with. Before making another box off camera and adding it in with the original small box. Then I can make another little worm of clay to add as a wire that connects the two. And that box right there is the new design, but that little part on the top is going to end up being taken off because I also don't like it. Then I can add some little things to the side where the bullet belts will go in the future. And now those are those bullet belts. And just remember that you want to make two and then attach them to the sides to act as the ammo that the machine guns will be firing, obviously. Then I can add some circles of clay, which will be the future minigun barrel things, which I'm sprinkling from the sky and adding in place somewhat haphazardly. Then I gave the machine guns their tops before eventually and later putting in some metal wire for structure, and then I can put some random bits of clay to add some extra detail to whatever this extra box is. And then I can cut some battle damage and scratches and scrapes into it to make the minigun gun look a little bit more interesting before moving on to finally painting. I can start by painting the machine gun a metal army green color before then painting the bands yellow, which will eventually get some black hazard stripes. Next, I can move on to painting the gun barrels a gunmetal gray because it's the next biggest thing and I want to get as much of the paint covered first, and then move back to more precise details. With that done, I can paint the ammo box a bright yellow like the yellow bands before, and I took off the ammo straps so painting would be a bit easier. Like I had mentioned previously, I can now put in those black hazard stripes to add some more detail to these caution band things. Then I can paint this little circle black as well before moving on to painting a couple other sections with gunmetal to add some more variation. And I can paint the ammo belt slots and this weird box thing that I made and make sure it's painted all the way through really carefully, and then I can paint on some red dots to add some more variation. Then I can also paint the little thing in the middle black as well to get rid of that awful clay color. And then I can also paint the ammo belts. Then I can paint the ammo belt with the same color of yellow as the other parts that I've painted it with. And then I can start with the dirtying up by using a brown, very watered down wash to settle into all the cracks and crevices to make this sculpture look very dirty before then hot gluing it into place so it won't move around. With that part done, I can go around the rest of the machine gun and do the exact same thing with the very watered down brown wash to achieve a uniform, grungy, and dirty look. And then to add even more to the grungy look, I can sponge on some black and blend it into the rest of the gun barrels to make it look like the guns are hot and burnt from usage. Then I can paint the holes on the top of the minigun black to make them look more accurate, I guess, and a little less flat. Then, as some final bit of weathering and battle damage, I can sponge on some silver and blend it in with the rest of the paint to make it look like it's been well used because the paint's chipping. With the double-barreled machine gun finally finished, I can now start painting Barry and his suit a nice bright blue. With his suit done, I can now start to paint his pants. His pants in the game are technically the same color as his suit, but I'm gonna change the pants to a darker color later to add a little bit more contrast and to make it look a little bit more interesting to look at. With that done, I can now start to paint his hair a nice chocolate brown, before then moving on to his eyebrows and painting them with the same brown, being careful not to get any parts of his face. Then I can move back to the suit to start painting the undershirt white. I'm intentionally leaving this coat of white less than perfect with tons of imperfections in it, because I plan to dirty it up later, which I think that just adds to it. Now, with most of Barry painted, I can now paint his arms and his face in this skin color. Even though this paint is technically not accurate to the original design, I'm already painting it all over his body, so it's too late to go back now, but I still think it looks a good color. Now I can repaint the pants like I had stated earlier, before then moving on to continuing to paint the suit, and then I can move on to carefully paint his tie black, being extra careful not to paint the undershirt black. Then I can move on to paint his eyes with a nice brown, followed by black for the pupils and a little white dots to his eyes to add some life, and because I'm too afraid to use UV resin. And I'm painting Barry's white dots in his eyes with the end of a paintbrush because it's the most consistent little circle that I can get without using the actual brush. Then I can paint his teeth a nice bright white. This white is like blindingly white, before then stippling on the rest of his beard and a little bit of his mustache. Now I can move back to finishing his hair, which gets a dark and light dry brushing to highlight the cuts and make the individual hairs a little bit more noticeable, before then taking a watered down brown and going in all the wrinkles to make them look a little bit more obvious. And then I can use that same light brown wash on his hands to make his fingers stand out a little bit and make his hands look slightly dirtier for whatever reason I decided to. I'm not really sure. Then I can dry brush some lighter blues on the suit and the pants to make it look a little bit more worn and well used, before then continuing to add extra wear and tear to the clothes by painting the sleeves a white to make the edges look frayed and destroyed, obviously. And then I can work on painting the tie a gray as well to do the same effect like I have been. With almost all of the suit done, I can now paint his undershirt with a brown wash to make it look extra dirty and worn like everything else. Then I can paint the jetpack handles a nice gunmetal, before then dirtying them up with some brown, as well as making the teeth look a little more defined with a light gray wash. And because I thought his arms were looking a little too smooth, I'm gonna add some manly forearm hair to make his arms look a little less baby fart smooth. Now, during this entire process, I don't know if anyone noticed, but I'm missing his shoes, and there's a good reason for it. I made the armature too short. So I had to wait to add it in later, but later is now, so I can start making his shoes. Since Barry's shoes are pretty basic, I'm gonna add some extra detail and a little bit more shape to make them look more interesting to look at, and so I can cram a bunch of detail into them and make this video longer. Starting with some treads, before then moving on to the shoelaces, which obviously it's a shoe, so that's what it needs. After painting his kicks, I can paint them a nice dark black, give them some gray dry brushing, and put on a layer of brown wash to make them look extra dirty and tie them in with the rest of the build. With his shoes done, I can put them to the side and continue working on Barry's body, starting with, again, a brown wash in every nook and cranny to make the clothing look extra dirty and well worn, followed by the tie and the undershirt as well. Now that all the weathering on Barry's clothes is done, I can snip the tips of the wire and super glue his shoes so they hopefully don't move. And then I can glue his giant machine gun backpack in place with a little super glue and hot glue, and I can fix and make the glue look a little better off camera. Finally, with Barry and his jetpack done, I can set him off to the side, and then I can start to make a simple base for him to stand on. I can use this perfect little MDF circle followed by a polystyrene sheet cut to size to act as the base, because it's not too big, it's not too small, and then I can work on cutting it out and trying to not chop a finger off. And because Barry is stealing this massive machine gun from a bunch of nerds, they're working in a lab, so I can cut some lab tiles in this circle of polystyrene sheet and then trim the edges to give them a little bit more dimension and texture. To make that aforementioned texture, I can carefully split the pieces apart and then scratch them along the angle and cut into them just slightly so that they're angled, but not enough where it takes substantial pieces out of. And if you're wondering why those pieces are numbered, I wrote them there so when I glue them back together, I'll know where they went so the pieces won't get attached wrong. Then I can glue my very easy puzzle in place before going outside my art studio to prime it, which is really just the basement, which is 15 steps away. Then I can spray paint it white, and if you see that white-esque design in the corner, that's a Nerf gun that I painted and customized off camera for a different project. So if you want to see that video, just comment 3 times about it, and then I'll make a video about it in addition to making a clay sculpture. Then I can paint on the rest of the lab gray and the yellow floor light before moving on to some extra detail. And that extra detail I was talking about is really just me being impatient because it turns out the paint actually didn't dry, so it didn't look exactly like I wanted, but it's fine. Now with the light, I can blend in lighter shades to the middle to make it look like it's glowing only very, very slightly. You really gotta look at it and trust the process. I promise it's there. With the top of the base almost done, I can paint the sides a nice gunmetal gray before then giving the light some UV resin to make it look extra shiny, like glass kind of. Then I finally stuck Barry in place and gave him some big ol' machine gun bullets around the base as well. I had to do this off camera because it was being really annoying, because I had to use a little support because the machine gun and Barry total were just so heavy that I actually needed another support. Now it's time for the reveal. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing for more characters that I can bastardize next. Thanks for watching. Bye.